presentation 20 minutes. And then we'll have 5 minutes of comments and maybe 10 minutes of, yeah, please come on. The first session is going to be, are you ready now? Or still we're having a bit more. The first paper is by Eman, Moustafa, Amira, El-Shal. Right. Eman is a research in the African export.
Is it working? Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Atif, for chairing this session. I'm happy to be between you all. MashaAllah, there is a lot of attendance, which is I know that our topic today is very relevant to what we are living in the world. I'm happy to present our paper titled The Greater Beast, Weather-Related and Health-Related Disasters in the MENA region. And I'm happier that the ERF chosen our title to be the title of the session, The Greater Beast. And I will give you a hint why we chose this title. So what do we mean by the Greater Beast? We witnessed during the COVID era that the whole world was actually focusing on health disasters and the effect of health disasters. But actually, it's not the elephant in the room. We found that weather-related disasters has a higher impact on economic development, on economic growth, especially in our region. And I did another research, and I can assure you that it has a higher impact on Africa as well. While Africa, we know, is contributing the lesser to these impacts. What motivated us and triggered us to do this research is that we found that natural disasters dominated the top 5 long-term global risk over the last 10 years. And under natural disasters, we found that weather-related and health-related disasters are accounting for 95% of all natural disasters since 1900. Weather-related disasters actually account for a higher percentage from the 95%. We have all witnessed during the COVID era that there is a significant negative impact on all global economies. But especially on MENA countries, we found that MENA minus Gulf countries actually deteriorated, or their economies shrank by almost 25%. And we are all economists here, and we know what does that mean to an economy to shrink by 25%. It means a lot of great disruptions to supply chains, to remittances, to FDI inflows, to capital inflows, to the whole resilience of the whole economy, especially for countries with lesser reserves, like MENA minus Gulf countries. And I can assure that using this figure, this is a very worrying figure, capturing the occurrence of weather-related and health disasters in the region. And you can find the persistent upward trend since 1980. And you can see in 2020 alone that we have 42 incidents of weather-related and health disaster in the region, and of course due to COVID, and half of them are weather-related and half of them are health-related. This trend, of course, will have a disastrous implication on the economic growth of the region and the whole economy. So our objectives in this paper are to estimate the instantaneous and the long-term impact of weather-related and health disasters, and to compare between them which of them have the higher impact, and to estimate the magnitude and persistence, both the magnitude of the disasters and the persistence of these disasters through the long-term impact. And we are shedding light on the solutions. So we are examining whether MENA countries can shoulder the impact of these disasters using their domestic resources, or they have to go for external finances. And we shed a special light on the role of sovereign wealth funds as a mitigator. We use an empirical approach, which is stemming from both literatures of economic growth. So we have the gurus of economic growth reaction functions, and we have Noy, which is the famous, with the famous paper on natural disasters. And we are estimating those two equations using two-way fixed effects and two-step GMM models. And we are using two-way system GMM models in addition to the fixed effect for the robustness of our results, and also because it gives an opportunity for us to estimate or calculate the long-term coefficients. These are our variables. Our dependent variable is the annual growth rate, and our main independent variable is health and weather-related disasters. I forgot to tell you that we are estimating those two equations 4 times. So one time for the occurrence of each disasters, and the other 3 and 4 times using the disaster intensity. For weather-related disasters, we are using disaster damage measured in US dollars, and for health disasters, we are using people affected, including injured and killed or mortality. The X vector includes our controls, and the Z vector is for our mitigators. Here are the results. This is the first table of our parsimonious model, the short-term impact of weather and health disasters together. As you can see, both weather and health disasters are affecting the economic growth of the MENA region negatively. But you can see here that the intensity of weather disasters have higher magnitude than health disasters. It's way higher. This is a parsimonious short-run model, and this is the full model. The full model assures the same results, so it's the same robust results that weather-related disasters and health disasters both affecting the region with a higher impact for weather-related disasters. We estimated the long-term impact or the long-run impact using the GMM, and the lower table here is the calculated coefficients for the long run, and as well you can see also the long-run impact, the higher long-run impact in magnitude for weather-related disasters when compared to health disasters. And so the solution for, now we've witnessed that weather-related disasters are eating the growth rate of the region significantly since 1980 until 2021. So what governments can do, what MENA economies can do, we actually tested 14 initial mitigators, and we found 9 significant. From within these 9, so actually we used the 14 mitigators were domestic resources and external finances. And we found that domestic resources mitigators have higher magnitude in absorbing the weather-related disasters in the region, and you can see the high coefficients of sovereign wealth funds in its both types, development and stabilizations. compared to other mitigators. You can see also here that institutional strengths have a significant impact in absorbing the negative impact, and illiteracy, which is a proxy for human development. These are the mitigators for health disasters since 1980, and it yields the same results as in weather disasters. We found that development sovereign wealth funds have the higher impact, and also we found a significant impact for UDA, which is a proxy for external finances, but you can see the difference between the two magnitudes. So our conclusion is that both types of disasters have negative impact on economic growth. Almost weather-related disasters decrease or eat from economic growth of the region almost by 11 percentage points in the long run and 2 percentage points in the short run. And we are actually we're searching for a solution for that, and we found that when it comes to domestic resources mobilization, it's the clue here. We found that sovereign wealth funds have a very high mitigation impact on these disasters, but also we found that institutional strength and higher level of human capital development are associated with a significant lower economic cost during the time of disasters. And this will lead us to the policy implications that in order for MENA countries to maintain a resilient economic growth during times of disasters, they have to efficiently mobilize their domestic resources. And by domestic resource mobilization, I mean effective government institutions and improving public spending base, especially the one related to health spending and health expenditures, and working on more effective tax regimes. Thank you, and I'm happy to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Eman. That's a very interesting subject, a very interesting research question, quite a bit of interesting results. I would like to raise three basic questions. First, to what extent the first differences in the moment, along Orlando Borland would have really improved the results, especially you're talking about long term. The other issue is to why have you separated domestic from international, all right? In the sense, if you are in an oil country where you have quite a bit of resources, that separation might mean that you could get some very specific results. But when you are like in Egypt or Lebanon or other areas where the domestic resources are not sufficient, that dichotomy may not really be as helpful as when you would see one leveraging the other, all right? The other aspect which I might want to suggest is that you did not make much difference between weather and climate. The two are not exactly the same. And what is probably quite helpful here is not to use temperature and precipitation as two separate variables, because there is quite a bit of interaction between the two. Today there is an index that most people are using, the SPEI, the Standard Precipitation Index, which takes the intersection and interaction between temperature and precipitation together. I mean, there is quite a bit of evidence that if the temperature is quite high, there will be more humidity, and therefore there would be quite a bit of precipitation. So to the extent that you separate these two, you might be missing some of these interaction terms. Or if you want to use them separately, maybe you want to use interaction terms to take care of that. The other aspect that one would like to really take into account here is how these channels between health and the environment. I mean, to some extent, you wanted to make a distinction between health and climate, but if you really want to talk about them, then you need to explain a bit what are the transmitting channels that would go from the environment to health, or from health to the environment. In the sense, if you have resilience and you have a system that would give you immunity, you probably can withstand and you can adapt to some of the differences coming from the disasters of climate disasters. So these interaction terms and the way transmission of some of these effects from one phenomenon to the other will become quite important to completely talk about them as if they are exactly the same, or even drawing a distinction without giving us the way the system works would be a bit problematic. Otherwise, I think it's a very good paper, and I'm really enjoyed it, and I think the results are quite meaningful in many respects, especially for a region like MENA, and the issues of health are not sufficiently strong to give you immunity from other disasters. Okay, I'm going to give 5 minutes or more, if you want to, for any question and comments. Yes, please, for that.
Excellent paper. The only comment I have was to what extent the effect of the sovereign wealth fund is actually a proxy for GCC, because most other members of this region don't have much, so. So I think that is one issue that in terms of really, which probably also your governance indicators also are a proxy for GCC. So it would be good to separate the two effects, if possible, to a dummy for if you are a non-GCC country. I'm not calling them dummies. I said dummy variable. So the other issue that I wanted to raise is that I think the fiscal ability to deal with the disaster is extremely important, but it doesn't do anything in terms of reducing vulnerability to the future, to future disasters. So is there any way to bring some kind of a dynamics into your model that you could see whether there is a carryover to dealing with the future disasters? Would the effects become smaller the next time, or they become bigger? Thank you.
I think I'm going to give this also go first to Mark, and then
Okay, thank you very much. I have just a quick question of clarification. Maybe you have already explained it and I came in late. I would like to know, what are those natural disasters? I don't know very many natural disasters, but the floods and earthquakes. And what are those health problems? I don't know any major health problem but the COVID-19. And or are there the diseases for the children, or more explanations on those would be appreciated. Thank you.
it was for her.
That's okay, it's fine. I wanted to actually extend on what Atif said around spillover effects, because I was thinking, first of all, health is a global public good. Climate shocks have transport or negative externalities, so does disease. And I wondered about what happens between countries, right? Because there's got to be some spillover effects, right? If there's a crisis in one country, there's going to be spillover effects, especially on neighboring countries. But I also wanted to point out the policy responses, and I was, it's great to put policy emphasis on individual countries, but these are global crises. COVID was a global crisis that required not only a response from individual countries, but a global response. And given where you are located in the African Export-Import Bank, just thinking about maybe levels of response, like what can the national government do? What should the global community be doing? Because these have to be integrated responses, especially if you're talking about poor countries that don't have the resources to really respond. So thinking more about spillover effects across countries between health and climate, and then what would be the global community's responsibility would be my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent paper, really exciting. I'm interested in what specifically constitutes a health disaster. Is there a time dimension to it? Because if it's a short shock, that's one thing. But if we're talking about air quality and a long-term sort of gradual effect that this might have, is that being picked up here, or is that separate?
Sure, yeah, two quick points. Half of them have been asked already. One is to what extent the results may be driven, the impact on health, by COVID, which was massive. So if you were to do it till 2019 and do a stability test, will you get the same results? That's number one. The second one relates to what it was asked, what is natural disaster? What is a health problem in the region? We know the COVID now, but was it the swine flu, the birds flu? What do you consider as health? What are your indicators of health impact?
Yeah, interesting presentation, and sorry, I didn't read the paper. I would like to, I have a very quick question in terms of which variable are you using to measure the effectiveness of the government administration?
Okay, I have some suggestion, methodological suggestion. For 40 years data, you use GMM and might be questionable. So my suggestion is that you can have a preliminary 3 test. First is, as she said, is spillover effect. So you can say cross-sectional dependency test. Then based on that, you can have a stationarity, whether your macro time series have stationarity or not. And third one is heterogeneity test, whether MENA country is very heterogeneous. So putting all country in one basket, imposing homogeneity restriction can have a biased result. Thank you.
Actually, there are 13 questions, so so I'll try to gather all the questions in some pillars. So separating domestic from international as in mitigation, we aim by that tackling the issue of debt. And when countries like MENA minus Gulf countries especially are going for external finances, most probably they are going to external finances inefficiently, and they put themselves in debt traps, and that's exactly what's happening now. So we meant by separating external from internal is to see that, or to shed light that these governments can use their domestic resources efficiently to at least absorb some of the effect of these disasters, and they can do it. So this is the separation. This is a question of the difference between international. Okay, so differentiating weather and climate disasters, they are not differentiated, but there is a long discussion inside the paper about the categorizing weather disasters and how it's related to climate disasters. It's already climate disasters. A very large pillar of climate disasters. So this categorization is inside the paper, as well as for health disasters. They are post-natural disasters, health disasters, and answering the other question about health disasters includes pandemics and epidemics. And it's tackling the long-run effects. So the pandemic the epidemic become pandemic after a longer time period with greater intensity. So this data set, and this is the most beautiful about this data set, it's already considering this long-term impact or the persistency of the health shock. So it's not a shock, it's a disaster. It has a longer-term impact. So this answered this question, and the categorization of natural disasters, what's weather and what's health, is also indicated very thoroughly in the paper. But I can say that weather disasters includes all what's related to weather, floods, hurricanes, cyclones, droughts, and everything, rather than the one which related to earthquakes and volcanoes. So all weather disasters minus earthquakes and volcanoes, because our region, alhamdulillah, is not like a spot for that. Health disasters includes pandemics and epidemics and some minor other categories. There is a question about, the dynamic part and the long-term impact. Actually, this can be estimated by a time series model. And you're mentioning stationarity and analysis and cross-section dependency. And I agree with you. We can use a time series model using this data, a panel time series, yes, and get the benefit of estimating or forecasting the future impact. So we can do both. We can do that inside the paper, maybe as a robustness. It will be a long paper, but it's worth testing. Yes, a proxy for GCC. Actually, I was thinking of separating our model into GCC countries and non-GCC countries, but the data is, of course, not sufficient enough to do that. But I can try the dummy variable and see what the interaction. Yes, this is a very viable comment. Thank you so much. I can't recall. Yes. If anyone, I'm happy to receive all questions, and my co-author as well. she can answer all your questions after the session.
Thank you very much, Eman. I mean, one of the issues that is quite important here is that there is post-COP27 and before COP, because they accepted the principle of loss and damage. We contribute in this region less than any other region to climate change, and yet we bear the brunt of the largest and most severe things. So this relationship between domestic resources, outside resources, has more than one dimension, one of which is to what extent can we access some of this money. Okay, the next paper is going to deal also with something quite interesting. It's about vulnerability, and particularly youth vulnerability to climate change. And I'm going to ask, who's presenting? You? Rahman Ali. All right. So Yasmine Abdelfattah, Dina Abdelfattah, Hala Abu Ali, and Rahma Ali. All right. Most of them are professors at the University of Cairo. And you're where?
I will introduce myself, no worries. Thank you.
The title is MENA Rural Youth Employment Vulnerable to Climate Change. Is it?
Thank you. Sure. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Rahma Ali. I'm not a professor. I work as a data analyst at the research center at New York University, Abu Dhabi. And today I am happy to present this paper to you along my fellow colleagues, Yasmine Abdelfattah, Hala Abu Ali, Dina Abdelfattah. And they are affiliated with Cairo University and the American University in Cairo. So today we are shedding the light on the climate change impacts on the rural youth employment. Okay. So really what motivated this study, as you may all know, the labor market in the MENA region faces many challenges like unemployment, informality, and inactivity. From the literature, it has been proven that informality and irregularity can be categorized under a bigger umbrella of vulnerability as defined by Hala and AlAzzawi. And also from the literature, we see this phenomenon that was referred to as MENA paradox by Ragi Asad et al., which mainly represents that in the MENA region we have higher level of educated youth, but at the same time we also have higher levels of unemployment. So we also have some empirical evidence from the MENA region on the impacts of rising temperature on the labor market, and we've seen that rising temperature can slow down productivity, and this might exacerbate the employment vulnerability further by pushing workers more towards irregularity and informality. And our study really adds another piece to the puzzle by looking at this vulnerability aspect of the employment. And we're trying to address these three main research questions. So we're trying to look at how climate change, measured by maximum temperature, precipitation, and humidity, have impact on employment vulnerability in some countries of the MENA region that I will talk about in a bit. And we also want to give like a gendered lens on the analysis. So we look how these impacts differ between males and females. And also, we're trying to look at other impacts of demographic characteristics on this aspect of labor or like employment vulnerability. Okay, it's very sensitive. Okay, so just to set some ground rules, the definition for vulnerability that we've used here includes different types of employment, which is self-employment, unpaid family worker, irregular wage work, and informal private sector. Anything else beyond these, we define as non-vulnerable, and for unemployed participants or unemployed people, we have another category for them we call out of labor force or unemployed. And here we tackle only a subgroup of the population, which is youth located in rural areas only, and youth aged from 15 to 29 years old. The countries of the study include three countries in the MENA region, which are Tunisia, Egypt, and Jordan. Okay. Okay. Okay, so first we take a snapshot on the situation of vulnerability in these three countries of study. Also here you can see the different years that we've looked at. So for Egypt, we're able to look at the years from 2006, 2012, 2018. For Jordan, we have data from 2 years, 2010, 2016. And in Tunisia, we have the year 2014 only. And the reason why we have this specific number, these specific years, these specific countries is two reasons. First, we needed to have some a variable on the visit date of the survey. Because we are merging it with some climate variables. So we needed to know which point in time to merge, to make that merge happen so that we can relate employment data with climate data. And yeah, the other reason is we needed to have the location variable or the, yeah, basically the geographic indicator, which I will just show you in a bit. When it comes to the climate situation in these three countries, so here you can see, here I'm showing the maximum temperature map of the three countries, and you can see like how diverse the climate is. In Egypt, the maximum temperature is moving more towards the higher end of the spectrum. However, in Jordan and Tunisia, it's the weather is much more cooler. When we look at precipitation, Again, we have this variability across the three countries. Egypt in the middle, we have, it has more of a dry weather. However, in Tunisia and Jordan, especially Tunisia, it's located more on the higher end of the precipitation spectrum. Okay, so this basically sums up what we're trying to do. So we have the labor data, specifically from these three countries in the MENA region, and we get the climate data from satellite resources. And then what we did is to merge these two different data sources. And after that, we implemented, we did our analysis by implementing a multinomial logistic regression using our dependent variable, which is the employment, vulnerable employment status. And then finally, we draw some conclusions and policy implications. So for the data merge, for the labor data source was the labor market panel survey produced by the ERF. And for the climate data, we used resources from NASA, NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, thank you, and the CPC, Climate Prediction Center. And the linking variable here that we've used was the second administrative unit. So this is like our location or like our unit of study. For Egypt, it's called Markaz. For Jordan, it's called locality. And for Tunisia, it's called sector. And this is why we needed to have that specific variable available in these different data sets so that we're able to make the merge. In addition to the visit date that I told you about, which helps us aggregate the climate variables.
It's not the same size. Sector is not locality.
They all fall under the second administrative unit in those three countries. I mean, of course, they're not the same. The second unit? Okay. I mean, yeah, good to know, and we can maybe discuss this towards the end. But for the sake of now, this is the administrative units that we used. Okay, and when it comes to the model, as I mentioned, we're using a multinomial logistic regression that has 3 levels: unemployment or out of labor force, vulnerable employment, and non-vulnerable employment based on the definition that I shared earlier. And basically what we're trying to do is try to estimate the climate variable impacts on our response variable. And for the climate variables, we're using 3 variables: maximum temperature, average humidity, and average precipitation. For control variables or explanatory variables, we're using a number of socioeconomic and demographic variables such as age, gender, education, and other demographic variables. Here I'm just showing the distribution of the vulnerable employment status across gender, and maybe for the sake of... The third column. Blue is out of labor force. Orange, vulnerable. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. The majority across all the countries is out of labor force. Especially for females. It's more prevalent among females. Yeah, this is for the combined years together. Yeah. Just because we have so many variables to show, so we dropped the time variability. And also we use the wealth index as part of our explanatory variables. And here you can see that towards the higher quintiles of the wealth scale, we see that the non-vulnerable jobs are more prevalent. Okay, so when it comes to the results, and I'm sure we will have this comment about separating the results or the impacts for temperature and precipitation. So when we look at the impacts of temperature, we see that a rise in temperature or humidity is associated with an increase of the odds of being employed in vulnerable jobs. And at the same time, it's also associated with a decrease in the odds of being employed in a non-vulnerable job. However, when it comes to precipitation, we notice that increased precipitation is associated with a reduction in the odds of being employed in either vulnerable or non-vulnerable job. When we look at the impacts by country, Yeah, we see that the heat stress or the increase in temperature and humidity has the same impact on Egypt and Tunisia. However, the impact is completely opposite when it comes to Jordan. And this highlights how the climate nature the unique climate nature that Jordan has an impact on the impact of these climate variables on the vulnerable employment status. Next, we look at the impact of some socioeconomic effects. We start by education. So education, in the case of Egypt, higher education shows a positive effect for vulnerable and non-vulnerable employment in Egypt. So those with higher education are more likely to have vulnerable or non-vulnerable jobs. However, in Tunisia and Jordan, the story is different. So higher education is associated with a decrease in the odds of being in a vulnerable employment. And this is a manifestation of the MENA employment paradox that I mentioned in the beginning. We have highly educated or more highly educated individuals that would rather be out of the labor force rather than joining a vulnerable or non-vulnerable job. Okay. Next, we have this gendered lens. So we see that women in general have lower odds of any type of employment, really, either vulnerable or non-vulnerable. When we look by country, we see that, and also by looking at the interaction effect between gender and education, we see that the odds of being employed is higher for educated women in Tunisia and Jordan. However, in Egypt, the story is again different. We see that highly or higher educated women have less odds of being employed at all, either in vulnerable or non-vulnerable jobs, which means that women are still largely found outside of the labor force. Sorry? Okay. The last thing is related to the household wealth. So the household wealth has a negative effect on workers' odds of becoming employed in a vulnerable job. So to summarize and try to conclude from these results, we see that there is a need for not only looking at employment or unemployment at a higher level, but rather really look more closely to unemployment rate when it comes to performance, quality of jobs, when we are assessing the performance of the labor market, not just looking at employment and non-employment rates, but also look at other aspects that really lead to that performance of the labor market. We also see that there is the vulnerability has a gendered impact, and we've seen that from the results I showed, which really gives or like sheds the light on the importance of improving the capacity of rural women and having development interventions that has that gendered lens or gendered approach. I think I have two more. Sorry, yeah. Since the paper tackles only rural respondents or rural areas, so again, we shed the light on the importance of rural sector development programs that are gender sensitive. And also we recommend that to have more stress on accessing the access of information and training to those, to youth who are residing in rural areas, especially in the MENA countries that we've just presented in the study. I'm done with my presentation, and I'm happy to receive your questions. Thank you.
Another excellent paper, no question about it. I have a few comments. I'll go very quickly because I see lots of good econometricians here, so I'll give them that chance. The idea of precarity is becoming a dominant characteristic of labor market. And the issue here is to what extent can we relate vulnerability to precarity? And it's not clear in the paper. In one sense, we're talking about people, but probably we need to talk about hours worked. And, like we have seasonal unemployment, we have different shifts, different inactivity, different rates. The informality of the market makes it difficult to get any real disciplined, organized labor jobs. So the idea of precarity versus vulnerability needs to be addressed. This would be good. Now, the whole issue here is the multinomial logistic model. You are estimating probabilities. To what extent can we feel comfortable making an assumption that the distribution about the population is a normal distribution from which we can draw these conclusions? There is an issue here which I'm going to let Kamyar maybe react to it. The other thing that is quite important here is the policy implications. To some extent, you're going to deal with climate change, but you're dealing with it as if it's an unemployment issue. The real challenge here is to what extent can the policy address climate adaptation resilience that would affect this rather than just dealing with the unemployment issue. Because it's not really the unemployment that's at the heart here. It's to what extent can you relate this unemployment to a climate change. And the other aspect is the way one would deal with the youth. You know, no matter how you look at it, the youth unemployment is now becoming an Arab issue. We have the highest unemployment rate, youth unemployment rate. And now what you need to separate, to what extent can you talk about the youth unemployment as a phenomenon, general macro phenomenon, so to speak, or labor market phenomenon, and how you can segregate it from how the climate is affected, right? And this is becoming really more. I would like, you know, to suggest, as we did in the first paper, is to use quite a bit of interaction terms, because they could have really, and gave us a real little bit look at this. All right, I open the floor for questions. Yes.
Thank you for like an interesting presentation. Just a couple of questions. First, like you're only focusing on you're focusing on youth 15 to 29 without including whether they are currently studying or they are non-students. And if you're including all of them, like you're including like, for example, those who are still in school, you're seeing whether they are employed or not. So this is not really a question, and you're including, like you're putting them in the three categories where they are not really eligible for one of these categories. So usually in most of the time when we work with unemployment, and we see it particularly when you're talking about descriptive work, we usually focus on the non-students. So just focus on your regression, run the regression for the non-students. Okay, that will really change probably many of your results. Second, I just second your comment regarding the theory behind it. What are we expecting to see? Like, how we expect the climate change to affect employment and employment vulnerability, and each of the outcomes you're mentioning as measures of vulnerability. Yani, we've been very familiar with like the effect of education, the effect of the wealth, but yani, since we're now starting to talk about climate change, we need to have like a strong theory behind how we see the direct and indirect effects. Third, sorry, all of them are just linked. Just a quick, try to see interact your gender with some of the climate change effects, because the effects might be different for women versus men. Okay, thank you.
Well, I had the same question as Rania. What's the mechanism driving the fact that climate is leading people to be employed in vulnerable jobs? I think that one mechanism is low productivity, that the climate change leads to low productivity, and this is why they are stuck in, yes.
No, a simple question or comment. When I see how you distribute young people, it's among out of work, out of the labor market, or unemployed, etc. I think it would make more sense. I don't know to what extent it has an implication. It's important for the results. But it would make more sense to look at young people out of school. Because those who are at school I mean, we don't have to worry about them as long as they're in, and those will be distributed among people who have vulnerable jobs, good jobs, unemployed, or NEET. I mean, neither employed nor, the category. Okay, another small word about gender. Women are not in the same situation as young men, in particular in Tunisia. I mean, they don't have the same opportunities in terms of employment and access to good jobs, even when they are educated.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. I have to say, I don't get excited about papers very often. This was a very exciting project you're working on. So yeah, I got really excited. But I just had a question actually. I'm not sure I understand your. I'm an empirical guy, so I'm not sure I understand your empirics here. So you start talking about weekly data, and then you talk about. So at what level are you doing this study? Are you looking? Obviously you're not doing it on a weekly basis. So that would be interesting to know. The other thing you do is, are you cheating a bit because you're using max temperatures, and I would have thought maybe you using average precipitation, etc., but max temperatures. And I'm wondering whether you would look at average and you get the same story or not. So that I would be interested in that. But I think the most important question is, you talk about climate change, but what you capturing really climate change, or are you actually capturing weather shocks here? They're very, very different things. I don't think you're capturing the distributional changes here. So I would like to know your views on that too. And then finally, the adaptation aspect of it, which you're not capturing in your empirics, I think. But yeah, thanks for a very provocative.
Thank you. Yeah, you can't expect policy to change climate. You expect that it would create capacities to adapt to it. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes.
Thank you. Okay. So I will respond to some questions, and then I will hand it to Yasmine to respond to the rest. So maybe I'll start with the last question, asking about the maximum temperature available. So it's average maximum temperature, and it's maximum the temperature during the day versus minimum towards the one captured at night. So we are calculating the weekly average maximum temperature for the week preceding the visit date of the survey. So this is one thing. There was also. Yeah, actually, yeah, the average between maximum and minimum. I think the assumption here that most of the work activities will be done during the day, but I think we can run the average and then see if there is like a stark differences between what we have already. What else? I think the point on separating students from the rest of youth, this is something we can definitely rerun so that we see if the results will change. But then here we're talking about rural populations where mostly children might be more likely to be taken out of schools or even have jobs after school. So this is also one way we thought about it while running this study. You wrote all of the questions, so I'll give you the floor.
So thank you for the comments, and actually we are for the maximum temperature because we had a previous paper where we were looking at the labor supply, the number of hours that have been working during the past week of the survey, and we looked at the maximum temperature. So we're just following what we had done before and seeing is it the same thing happening on the employment status or not, but we can check for the average temperature. It's one thing that we can look at it. For the capacity building and the adaptation, yes, we need to look at this part to just provide proper policy implications. And sorry, rural areas, like most probably, yes, they go to school, but I think they take them to work as well. So, so we can look at this again. The seasonal and the activity itself were one of the variables, but we didn't see much difference because we are focusing on the rural, so most of the activity are agriculture, yes. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I thought you were presenting the next paper.
That's
All
why I
right. The last paper, but not least, is about the nexus of economic inequality, disaster, climate change, and if there is any causation between the direction of the causation, if there is any. It's by Yasmine Abdelfattah. She is a economist, professor at the PEI, the Canadian Prince Edward Island, all right? And another fellow Canadian, all right. And it's also going to be Shireen AlAzzawi and Nada Rostom. I think Nada is at Santa Clara, I suppose, is it?
No, Nada in GPAL MENA.
She is?
Yes.
All right. But
She's a young lady.
who's the Santa Clara? All right. All right.
Thank you.
20 minutes.
Oh, that's lovely. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm so happy to be back in the ERF without being online, seeing people face to face. It's lovely to see you all. And today's paper, we are looking at a worldwide phenomena, natural disasters, climate change, and inequality, and how this interlocking relationship is going on. So it's not working. Okay, so let's see the situation worldwide. We're interested in the natural disasters, and here we have the number of events, and we have to focus on the number of events with the category. So the first one is the flood, the second one is the storm, the biological is the health, and the geophysical, which is earthquakes and volcanoes. And as you can see, the drought comes in the second from down. So this, we need to focus on the number of events. So flood number 1, storm number 2, and we have the drought at the end.
What's the period you're talking?
It's from 1990 to 2020. We try to limit the data to this era because this is where most of the data availability worldwide is available. Let's move to how number of people affected by these disasters. Flood is the same at the top. We have the drought from the bottom, it moved to the second, and then we have the storm and the geophysical in the fourth. So we have to focus on the impact and the intensity. And let's see what comes next. Yeah, that is the total damage calculated in billions of dollars. And we have the storms, and it's 43% comes from the storms, and followed by flood, and then we have the geophysical and the drought. So we have the number of events, we have the number of people affected, and we have the money that's spent over this damage. Drought is the fourth. Yeah. 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 Let's see. We look at the dry disasters, and which is geophysical, drought, wildfire in extreme temperature. They are fluctuating from 1988 until 2018, but as you can see, the geophysical is at the top. And if we move to the wet disasters, it's the flood, landslide, and storms. And as you can see, the blue line is the flood, and it's increasing over time. There's a positive trend. And this is very apparent in what is happening in Pakistan, for example, in the last couple of months. And it's affecting and it's increasing. And this is really sad. And if we are comparing the wet disaster with the dry, with the health, we can find the wet is apparently more disaster count. So here comes, is the situation the same for each continent? No. So Asia, the distribution for the different disasters is different from Africa, North America, Europe, South America, and Oceania. And as you can see, we have the storms for Asia is the number of disasters is bigger than for Africa. For example, Africa are most hit by floods, and as well as Asia is the same thing. But for North America, we have the storms, and for Europe, it's the flood the same. So we would advise, like, no, the assistance that's given to each region has to be different. We cannot provide all continents with the same kind of assistance. So if we look at the spatial distribution, the temporal spatial distribution of the number of people hit, as you can see, if we started by 1990, yes, we are hit, but it's not that much. If we look at 2020, the situation is more devastating. We have the red means we have Asia is all hit, sub-Saharan Africa, and the Americas, they are not that really, but Asia and sub-Saharan Africa is really the number of people who are hit are that it's so many people are hit by disasters. So there is the spatial dimension and the temporal dimension. So it means we have more disasters, more people hit by time. So this is very alarming and has to be considered in the next scope, that there has to be, like, minimizing, I wouldn't say stop of carbon emissions, but it has to be sorted out what has to be done, because we are polluting our Earth, beloved Earth, and this has to be stopped because we are affecting people on Earth.
Can you make a zoom on our region in North Africa? Because they're different from Africa. North Africa is not like sub-Saharan.
I guess we have to go down. I have no idea. So we are hit, but not that much like the. No, it's here. It's yellow. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So here we have the temperature anomalies. It's increasing, and أنا طلعت برا صح؟ بس أنا قلت أريح الزبون. Oh, okay. Okay, so. Oh, okay. Okay, so here, if we look at the the growth, the log of GDP per capita versus the total hits lagged. And we are interested in what? We are interested in the interlocking relationship between growth, inequality, natural disasters, and it's a complex one. And here, what is interesting about it is that inequality engraves the disaster. So when we have high inequality, it means people will be disadvantaged from having a natural disasters or the climate change. So our contribution is to disentangle this mechanism and to see if they are really connected or not. Is there a reverse causality between these variables? And the panel analysis will help us to figure out if there is a disaster inequality trap or not. The data set that we have constructed, we have looked from 1990 to 2020, and we had the data, country-level data from the World Inequality Database, Climate Change Knowledge Bank, and the World Bank. And the most interesting data set that I newly introduced is the Geo-Referenced Emergency Event Database. And it's a very rich database with all the natural disasters, the health ones, and it runs from back before the 1990s. I believe it starts from 1950. So it's a very rich database for any of the researchers that's interested to work on that. And this is our empirical strategy. We have 3 models. We are doing simultaneous equation. We have new classical growth model, the inequality one, and the natural disasters equation. And we will try to solve them simultaneously. And these are descriptive statistics and the definition of the variables. And we run separate equations using fixed effect and random effect. And then the final results is that we used error component 3-stage least square, and we solved the 3 equations simultaneously. And as you can see, we have here the Gini index. It's affecting the hits. The hits is the number of deaths and the number of people affected, normalized by the last year population. So it means we have, there is a direction of effect from the disasters to the Gini. It's engraving the Gini index. And if we look at how the growth is impacted by the Gini, it's significant as well. And here, if we have a look at, we have differentiated between dry disasters and wet disasters. This is one thing we did. And here as well, the hit is, it's affecting the Gini. And if we look at the climate change, variables, we would say that the temperature is significantly affecting the growth, and it's decreasing the growth. So that's one of the things that it implies that we have a climate change impact. And if we move to the conclusion, we would say that we have an interlocking relationship between these variables, and reducing inequality may hinder growth, but it can boost incentive structures. Climate change is slowing down, apparently, and lower inequality will reduce the economic loss from the natural disasters. So thank you all, and I hope you enjoy our presentation.
Thank you, Yasmine. I mean, let's be modest a bit. It's a very difficult question that she's dealing with. And the chance of getting to some clear things is not quite high. But look, and I have somebody from Chile here, I'd like to say, an earthquake in Chile would kill few people. the same earthquake, even less in Haiti, would kill thousands, if not million. What's the difference? There must be very important variables that in Chile, the income distribution, the vulnerability, the government policies, the structure of the economy is one that would make it far less probable that the same disaster would have the same impact. Actually, one of the issues is that in Haiti, most of the people die because they congregate in the area that is most vulnerable, and the rich are always into higher places. They don't have to live in the crowded, vulnerable places. So that nexus issue is extremely important. Now, the story here is, to what extent are you able to disentangle these complex things? And what I'm really unhappy about, happy about the subject and everything, is that you talk about causation, the reverse causation. So please don't bother. Okay? In the sense that we cannot go from inequality creating the disaster. That's not the issue. The issue is to what extent inequality would make disasters far more damaging to other people. There is an issue here because the other one would give you a policy implication. The first one does not. And the other issue is you have too many parameters. All right? I would have liked to see in some R squared, you know, not just the R square, I'd like to have R bar squared, so to speak, because there's lots of variables, and I was a little bit concerned about this. The other issue that is quite important here is that maybe you don't want all this nexus. You might want to separate a little bit the disaster and the climate and the income distribution. Don't put too many things, because then it will complicate the story. It will become extremely difficult to disentangle things. Okay, so questions? Yes. I'm going to take people first. I'm going to take people who haven't spoken yet.
Thank you. Well, Atif made excellent comments to a fascinating paper. So on the methodology in particular, I liked one of, let me expand a little bit. I think what Atif said, he raised many points, but one was simplify. Simplify your analysis to less interactions, to the relevant ones, to less variables. And I think that is very good advice. And focus more on the mechanism of transmission. And as Shadok suggested too, when he said infrastructure, try to put in, like your colleagues did in the first paper, some interaction effects. For instance, the damage of earthquakes depends not only on the income inequality, but on the quality of the infrastructure. It's very hard to get data for the quality of infrastructure, but in Chile, people do not die from the worst earthquakes on Earth, which are in Japan and in Chile, because the buildings are put up to be to withstand a 9.5 on the Richter scale earthquake, while not in Haiti. So this is a very good point made by Sharoch, who will continue doing many more good points.
Yes, just I wanted to maybe I have to read your paper carefully, because I just want to know what is the theoretical basis of this relationship, because there are many ways of actually doing it. One way would be, there is a lot of evidence, a lot of studies have been done that poor are much more vulnerable to climate change because of many factors: infrastructure, poor health. They're living in areas that are much more vulnerable and so forth to heat or to rising sea or whatever, floods. But then the issue is, what are you going to do about it? Tackle the climate or tackle the inequality? So I think in terms of policy recommendations, you need to set it up in a way that at the end you could actually make some recommendations. And I would I would go with both. I mean, you have to do climate stuff and then reduce inequality.
Sorry, in the middle of your presentation, the king was crowned, so I sort of got nervous and I lost track. I lost track of what's happening. But one thing on, I think I just mentioned on MDAT is, I mean, is there better data I understand there might not be, but is there better data you can use? Because essentially, it's self-reporting here. And I think for a lot of the countries and poorer countries that we talk about, you don't get the reports on deaths and the destruction, etc. Whereas for the advanced economies, these are really good because it's in the insurance data. So that's one thing so if you did this study for the US, this would be amazing because you would have really good data. But in this global setting, I'm just wondering whether that's something to think about. Are there better sources that you could be using? It's not a criticism of you, it's just general.
Any more questions?
Is there a distinction in the calculations between urban and rural areas? Because I notice, it seems to me, that there are a lot of awful things that happen in urban areas which don't exist, like the fumes from the transport, the garbage collection and lack of garbage is much more serious in urban settings. Maybe a way of specifying where the policymakers should take a note.
I just wanted to emphasize the issue of causality that Atif has mentioned, because it's not obvious what causes what. The second comment is about the purpose of the objective of your work and what you have done. It's a bit fuzzy. I mean, I was expecting something about where you link clearly climate change or disasters and so on with inequality, but it seems to me you are targeting different things at the same time, and I'm not sure about that.
Thank you. And it's all very nice, but I'm really confused, and I would like to learn, what is the mechanism? How does it go from here to the Gini and the other results that you are considering? What is it? How does it work?
I guess I'm going to push back against some of the other commenters. I wasn't going to say anything, but I actually think this question of climate disasters and the impact it has on income inequality is really important. So I mean, some people are saying the causality is the reversed, but with time use data, you should be able to parse out, the impact on Gini after the fact, although it's very tricky because Gini, so you need probably a different measure of inequality. But if you can just parse out the part where you're talking about environmental impacts that then affect income inequality, that's an important contribution, because we can talk about, yes, inequality worsens things, but we should also be talking about the opposite. So trying to parse that out would be very valuable, I think.
Thanks. Okay. You have the long list.
Yeah.
One more, last question.
Yeah. Just building on what Dr. Heba Handousa said, the rural-urban, I think the two issues you're dealing with, climate change or disasters and inequality, we know they have a very strong within-country regional dimension. The concentration of poverty, the concentration of poverty, for example, in Egypt and Turkey, it has a very strong regional dimension, and also disasters, maybe they hit in areas that are, the poor areas, or maybe they hit in the areas that are not the poor areas. So I think it would be interesting also to explore that aspect in your data to see if it makes, I don't know if in the climate change and the disasters ones you have the inter-country distribution of the disasters or not.
I I've seen some work by Yasmine in which she segregated jobs that you have to work outside from jobs that you work inside. Those that work outside are more vulnerable to climate and weather and affect the product. So there are lots of the issues that you have done before. Could you bring them to this?
Okay, thank you so much for the comments, and it's really amazing. And the dilemma comes in which variables do we need to select and how they interact and how to get them into the simultaneous equation and what results are you expecting. So that's, and how to like get all of these data into one data set. That's a long journey that we started. I'm interested in this topic because the literature is talking about disasters, inequality, economic growth, but my previous work I was doing based on Kamyar's paper, I had a paper on how economic growth is affected by climate change. And we got results, good results for the MENA region. So I thought, why wouldn't we have and see, is there actually an impact besides the natural disasters? So that's the struggle that we need to work on it in order to submit the paper into a good journal, is to decide which is the variables that we need to specify and the mechanism that we are interested to decide. Do we have I'm sure that there is an impact from the climate change to economic growth. That's for sure. And the results is supporting this. For the number of hits, is it affected by inequality? Yes, we have inequality. So all of these are apparent, but having them together, that's the struggle, yes.
Does your econometrics allow you to make statements about causality?
The simultaneous equation, yes, it helps in this, yes. Yeah. So here, simplifying the analysis, I think that's an excellent advice to us. The interaction terms, yes, we can do it. For the evidence, the poor are more, that's why we have the inequality. So we are looking at the poor through the inequality perspective. And for rural, urban, like the advice from Dr. Heba, we can have a variable for the urban population versus or rural population, see is how it's affected.
But your guess is urban is harder hit or rural?
It depends on the country. So we're thinking of having regional dummies to see how each region is affected. So this is our next step to work on. The data set, it has the location of the disaster and the number of people hit, the number of deaths. So it has the regional, but the thing is we are working worldwide. If we want to have a case study, that would be nice to work on, like Egypt, for example, and look at what happens to different regions.
Can you do something for our region specifically?
That would be, thank you. We can have it as a future research.
All right, this has been an excellent session, and the best part of it is you can go and eat on time.